Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Discriminating Gamer. People are really happy that the Turkish government is giving heavy armored vehicles to Ukraine. Everybody loves Thanksgiving turkey. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to take a preview look at Aces in Armor from PKB Games. In Aces in Armor from PKB Games, 1 to 4 players will take on the roles of various belligerents in World War II, and each will strive to achieve dominance for their team on the battlefield. Now, the factions here are the Germans. You have 2 different kinds of Germans, slightly different colored Germans. They will represent the teams that belong to the Axis. And then you will have the Allied teams. And these represent the American soldiers and the Soviet soldiers, different shades of green. Now, for the game board is double-sided. You can choose which map you want to play on. And for bigger games, you're going to use the whole map. For smaller games, you're just going to use the one side of the map. And if you are playing the 4-player, it's recommended that you actually sit kind of diagonal from your teammate rather than side by side. Now, your 4 kinds of units in this game are air, artillery, armor, and infantry. Now, you are going to have kind of some aids that will tell you exactly what their stats are for each of those kinds of units, depending on the various, whether they're allies or German. And then what you're going to do is set up the board. Now, how you do this is every player is going to get a number of chips. What you're going to do is assign 2 units to a specific chip, and then after everybody's assigned their units to the chips, without seeing the number on the other side, they're going to flip those over, and then they're going to place their units on the game board in the numbered hex that corresponds to that chip. So players will create a setup that has their units kind of scattered around the board as well as their enemies. Now next, we'll have another dice roll to determine who goes first. Now each turn has 4 phases. First of all, you are going to move troops, then you're going to declare attacks, then you're going to resolve combat, and finally you'll have money actions. You will be able to collect money, you will be able to repair some units in certain circumstances, and you will be able to bring more units onto the board. If you're playing with 2 players, the first player is only going to move 1 of his units at the beginning of the game. But typically, you're going to have this move troops phase. Now, your air units, they can just fly as far as they can go. They've got a movement range that they can just fly. But your land units, of course, have kind of movement point allowances that are affected by terrain. So if they go into the woods, it's going to cost them a little bit more to move. If they travel along a road, they will get bonuses. So movement, of course, is very much influenced by the terrain in the game. Now, you also have to be aware of rivers and bridges in the term. That will greatly affect movement. In fact, to cross a river without a bridge will take the unit's full movement ability. Now, one of the things you're trying to do is occupy factories. Now, in order to occupy a factory, you have to move in with infantry only. They can go in and occupy one of these factories. You place your flag there, but it takes their full movement point in order to occupy a factory to get it up and running. Now, once you've moved infantry into a factory and you've taken it over, any of your units can move into that factory because that is where you are actually going to repair your units. Now, if ever a unit moves past another unit into a adjacent hex of another unit, the player that is being moved against next to, they can actually intercept, essentially initiate a combat right off the bat to intercept their enemy. In step 2, you declare attacks. Essentially, you can go ahead and when units are adjacent to each other, you can declare an attack against another. Now, some units, as I say, are air units and some are ground units. The air units can attack ground units, but not all ground units can attack air units. And in order to do that, you have to have the proper icon in order to tell you that they can actually fire at those air units. Now, the first thing you're going to do is determine if the defending units can actually defend themselves, if they can roll dice against their attacker. And as I say, some air units are safe from some ground units. In some cases, a ground unit simply can't fire at an air unit. But also, too, in the case of, say, the howitzer, it can't roll dice at units at close range. So if a unit is adjacent to it, it's not going to be able to fire back. Now next, the attacker and defender will determine how many dice they are going to roll. Now how many dice you roll is dependent upon the damage that has been taken by that unit. So for instance, if your unit has not taken a lot of damage, you're going to roll a lot more dice. But depending on the number of damage that you have taken, you're going to roll fewer and fewer dice. Now you may get bonus dice. If you are attacking a unit and there is a unit of your own that is adjacent to you and the target, then you can go ahead and get some bonus dice from that unit as well to increase your chances of damaging that opposing unit. And the same thing is true of air power. If you have two planes that are adjacent to an enemy plane, you can roll bonus dice again for that attack. Now, once you have determined the number of dice you're going to roll, you're going to grab that number of 12-sided dice and you're going to roll them. And then you're going to consult the player aid, the unit's player aid, and it will tell you exactly how many of those die rolls you get, what numbers on those die rolls translate to hits. Now, hits are important, but that's not the end-all, be-all of combat. You're going to determine the number of hits that you have. You're going to determine the number of hits that the defender scores against you. Now, next, you're going to determine damage. Essentially, what you're going to do is you are going to add up all of the hits that you scored. You're going to look at your enemy's player aid, and it will say exactly how many hits translate into actual physical damage. Now, this is going to change because if a unit is in open terrain or if it is in covered terrain, forested, that's going to change. They're harder to hit when they're in forests. So you may roll a number of hits, but depending on where they are, it may not do a lot of damage. It may not do any damage. You're going to then attach the dark little beads that show damage onto that unit. You're going to place it on that unit so you can instantly know how powerful that unit is and how many dice it's going to roll in any future combat. Next, you apply experience. If a unit deals any damage to another unit, it gains 1 experience bead that, again, you put on that pole. If you destroy that enemy unit completely, you actually gain 2 experience points. So you go ahead and put those on the pole, and again, you can see instantly how powerful that unit's going to be, both in terms of its experience and also its damage. Because critically, the experience will affect exactly how much damage it can deal out on its turn. Now, the first 2 experience points you put on there are white, rookie, not much is going to change. But then you put yellow, which signifies you're a veteran. That is going to increase your combat ability. And finally, the last one you're going to put on top is red, and that means you are a war hero, and you're going to be able to hit the enemy a lot easier. Now, finally, step 4 is kind of the money transactions. The first thing you're going to do is collect money. For every factory you occupy, you're going to gain 1 coin. Now, you're going to go ahead and collect these coins, and you can trade them with your ally, but for every transaction with your ally, it costs 1 coin to go to the bank. So if you want to give 4 coins to an ally, you would only actually give them 3. You would give 1 of your coins to the bank. Now, if you have a damaged unit on a factory, you can spend a flat 2 coins. You can put them underneath the unit in the factory, and then at the end of the turn, you can remove those coins, put them in the bank, and you can also repair up to 3 damage from that unit. Now, also, you can purchase units. So if units have been destroyed, you can bring them back. What you're going to do is pay a number of coins equal to their purchase cost on their player aid. You can go ahead and bring them back into any empty factory that you control. Now, in a 4-player game, the winning team is the first to capture 6 factories on the board. In a 2-player game, it's the first to capture 4 factories on the board. Who's ever able to accomplish this first wins. Aces in Armor. Aces in Armor is a World War II combat skirmish game. Now, people who play a lot of games like this will be very familiar with some of the concepts here, such as, things like movement points and, combat cover and range and these sorts of things. But there's a lot of new and interesting ideas here in Aces and Armor. Now, for instance, you've got your units that have the little plastic poles on them, which you use to indicate both damage and experience points. These are great references, so you can just look right at the board of the units, and you know exactly how powerful they are, what their potential in combat is, both your own units and your enemy units. Now, the whole combat system here is interesting in that hits don't necessarily translate to damage. You have to give reference to the combat board or the player aid board rather, that says what a unit's ability to resist hits are in the open and what they are in cover in the forest. So you're always consulting that to see just how badly you hurt someone. Even if you roll a lot of dice, that may not translate, roll a lot of hits, that may not translate to the kind of breakthrough and damage against your enemy you were hoping for if their cover is right, depending on how strong they are. But also, too, how the damage of a unit actually affects its combat ability. Now, you've got the standard number of dice that you roll every round if a unit is fine, but as those kind of damage beads accrue, then it's going to be very obvious that is just not going to be as much powerful. It may be a target of opportunity if you can really hurt it, and it may not be able to hit you back. For instance, if it's only going to roll one die and you're going to take at least 2 hits to take damage, you're pretty safe attacking that target. You've also got a plethora of 12-sided die. Now, I got to tell you, who doesn't love a D6? But I really love a lot of these bigger dies. It seems to me to up the stakes, makes it a little more scary, a little more compelling, a little more dramatic. So overall, combat is a very interesting part of this game. But you've also got the competition for the factories. You're trying to make sure you can take those factories, hold those factories, use those factories effectively to repair your units, to gain income and then repair your units, and even bring units back once they've been destroyed. Now, this game boasts optional missions as well as a solo mode and a cooperative mode, so there's some real replayability value here as well. So this game will be available on Kickstarter in June. I will provide a link to that campaign in the description. So if this looks like a game that you might be interested in, then you're going to want to check out Aces and Armor. Thank you once again for joining us today on The Discriminating Gamer. As always, we ask you to please leave a comment for us on YouTube, on Board Game Geek, on our Facebook page, or on thediscriminatinggamer.com. We'd ask you to please like us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter. I'd also ask you to check out my other channel, that is Cody Carlson, PhD, where we talk about military history and books on history, fun things like that. I'd ask you to please subscribe to that channel. That would mean a lot to me. Please leave a thumb for this video on Board Game Geek, and if you do really appreciate the content we bring you on this channel, I'd humbly ask you to click on the Super Thanks button and leave a tip. Ladies and gentlemen, what's the most used tank on a battlefield? The fuel tank. Please somebody help me on my feet again, and I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know where I've been. Please somebody help me on the solid ground. It's a long time, and I'll be dying. Once a year I wind up in the band. And let's be honest, sometimes those other chairs, they're just not up to the quality you'd expect.